Hi there. Welcome to today's podcast. Thanks for joining me as always. I really appreciate you as listeners, and hopefully you're getting some value out of these podcasts. Today as I record this, there's a lot of chaos going on in the economy, a lot of uncertainty, potential recession. I think we're kind of already in one, but a lot of chaos. And, obviously wealth is one big area. Obviously, that's what I talk about primarily. But, I think about wealth in a whole host of ways. Anyone knows me recognizes that there's wealth that shows up in other areas of our lives too. And, you know, when I think about my health and think about longevity, my goal is to obviously be on this earth for as long as possible and provide service and value and be able to spend time with my family, but obviously be healthy enough that I can enjoy it. And so I think of it just not about longevity, but having good health for as long as possible so I could do those things. And as I've reflected on even my health, which I feel fairly healthy, what I recognize is that the typical approach to medicine may have some issues to it. And so having a more holistic approach and thinking about other functional medicine sort of approaches has really got me interested. And I went down a path of getting some extra tests and consulting with other physicians around taking a look at what's happening today. Is there something that's happening underneath that I'm not even aware of, to learn more so I can take more preventative steps to take care of my health and give me the increased chance of living a long and healthy life? And through the course of that, I was shocked because, through some of these extra tests that I found out, I had, things I wasn't really aware of. I had extremely high cortisol levels, which I didn't really recognize. I had extreme levels of lead in my blood and tissues that I don't know how that got there. So a host of other things that I just wasn't aware of. And I think about that, and now I'm on the sort of a trajectory to address them and examine them. But I could have kept on going and never even examined these things that are underneath the surface that are causing me way more risk and uncertainty around my future health. And it really got me thinking about it. And I think, unfortunately, that happens to us in our finances too. We can feel like things are into control and we know what's happening, but what I have come to realize and dealing with clients and even in my own finances, there's a lot of things that sit under the surface, whether they're eroding wealth over time that sometimes you are become invisible or you just get too used to seeing them, or they're potentially massive risks that just go undetected that are causing significant risk to people that people are not even aware of. And so today, what I wanted to cover are just some of the core things that I have seen or come across where people maybe are not aware of it. They may have some level of understanding of it, but not truly getting the right advice or information to help detect how problematic they could be. So I want to just cover some of those areas so that you can become educated and then seek out the right advice and help to address them if they are impacting your wealth or creating more risk for you. So the one big first area that seems fairly straightforward, I think I come across from a lot of people, is a lack of awareness around cash flow. And, I'm not a big proponent of creating these very detailed budgets. And back in the day, I used to kind of do that stuff. But, at some point, I kind of moved away from it and started having a different approach to bucket my expenses in large buckets, but not every little detail. But the reality is that just like anything, and I equate this to eating sometimes, is that we can almost like consciously spend right money, especially if we're not really looking at it. We get so busy in life, and so the lack of awareness of cash flow causes issues because in our lives we can unconsciously spend just like we can unconsciously eat, and so that prevents us from having more money to save and invest and apply to different areas. And we may be spending money on things that really have no strong meaning to us. I mean, there's even a company, I believe I forgot the name of it, that can help you find all those subscriptions that you've been paying for that you didn't even know you had anymore. And so, imagine the magnitude of what that could be for people and the cash flow that is potentially leaking out of people's budgets and financial lives because they're just not aware that they exist. And the fact of the matter is that, if you think about and study a lot of the wealthier folks, yeah, they may not be looking at it at that level of detail, but they're also thinking about how can they build cash flow. There's so much talk about becoming building your net worth, right? Becoming a millionaire, which obviously anyone this day and age with inflation the way it is, $1 million doesn't feel that way anymore. But most of the wealthier folks, that they have multiple streams of income and cash flow, and they really watch it because they recognize that things will change in the economy and life, and having diversity in cash flow is so important. So it's a kind of combination of two. One, not understanding where dollars are flowing naturally during a course of a month or a year, but then also not really focused on building other streams of income because we get secure in our jobs or businesses or life, and we're not looking for those alternatives to help shield us from things that change. So those are the kind of the big two areas of cash flow that I see often. And so for you, uh, um, a family and trying to build your wealth is getting some level of structure around managing your cash flow and understanding where it's going so you can pay yourself first and sort of increase that. But then think about ways you can add to your streams of cash flow, whether through owning businesses or real estate. There's a whole host of ways, but it's definitely an area that you should consider looking into so you can shield when things change in life. The second big area that I think causes certainly issues for people, especially as you build in your wealth, is taxes. We all know this. This is our biggest expense we all face in our lifetime. And especially as people become more successful, it becomes a bigger burden. And some people may not realize it today, but we are in some of the lowest tax rates across the board. But, as you look at it from whether it's the FICA or federal, state income taxes, property tax, you add this up, it could be well over half of the income that flows out of your life. And so this also hits on cash flow. But one of the things that in the tax strategy or mitigation world is primarily focused on deferring, right? I put money into qualified plans, get a deduction, and then down the road and let that money compound and defer over periods of time, and that's beneficial. Yeah, that's one thing, and I think there's some benefit to that. But I think most people are heavily invested in that, and that's their approach to mitigating taxes. Well, what I do know is the tax code is a set of incentives that the government puts in place to guide the economy. And if you pay attention to it and follow kind of what they would want us to do, there are ways to reduce tax legally, right? And mitigate tax. There's no requirement we have to pay tax, especially if we're following what the government wants. And there's a book that I would highly recommend you read from Tom Wheelwright, Seven Investments the Government Will Pay You to Make. That's an option. He has a tax-free wealth one too, but there's a lot of information around that too that helps you examine how can I legally reduce taxes based on what the government wants us to do, start a business, house people, give to charities. There's a host of ways to get good deductions, shift income from ordinary income, which is what most people have with their jobs, to capital gains or even reducing it completely. And there are just like people who are maybe exploring things like solar and other things, like there are tax credits within the code that people can take advantage of if they knew they existed and how to apply them. So it's incumbent upon you to start thinking about those things, because the more money that you keep in that world, the more you can save and invest it and use however you want. So I think of tax, it's not just a one shot deal where you lose a dollar, but that you lose the opportunity cost that comes with that, because that dollar never can grow and earn for you for the rest of your lives. So that's really an important way to think about it, that how do we save that legally? And actually, in a lot of cases, you can do it to support what the government's trying to do anyway. The third area that I see is often overlooked is associated with fees. And, they're all over the place, and sometimes you can almost become immune to them. You think about the world of finances, and this is not a saying this is the wrong way to do it, but, when I was a client and going through this, I didn't love the concept of this assets under management, where they would charge a fee on my assets for managing it, and that's all they would do. And so as my income grew and assets grew, that was a larger percentage of it. And, listen, there's no perfect model anywhere, but it's a model that I see that can be easily compound and grow to massive amounts. And so I never really subscribed to that. And I think that's something where there's a lot of fees that are being extracted from people's assets. And the question is, are you getting the value from that, right? To help you broadly manage your not only investments, but your wealth, which has a lot of other facets to it than just the investments. And so it's something to consider. I mean, even if you have a $1 million portfolio that's being managed for 1%, that's $10,000 a year that's just being siphoned out of accounts. And so you just need to understand whether you're getting value for it. And there's a lot of ways that folks are doing that, but just taking a look at those sorts of fees along the way will help you understand if you're getting the value for what you're paying for. And it's just something to consider. So it's sometimes we can almost forget about them because they're happening behind the scenes, but over a course of time, they could extract, a good chunk of your wealth that never gets to grow. But just similar to taxes, any dollar that leaves there never works for you ever again. So it's important to try to nip those things in the bud so you can extract more value for yourselves and your families. The fourth area that, we just become so accustomed to it is using banks to store our wealth, to borrow against. And so we it's just the way we transact and it's what we've grown accustomed to. And, this day and age where we sit now with higher interest rates, you can certainly get something of value for storing some money there, whether there or in money markets. But, in banks, didn't really give you much in terms of interest. So that is a massive wealth eroder over a course of time, especially with inflation, the way it has evolved, especially in the last years since COVID. So, I think there's roughly a number about 25% of the value of a dollar has been lost over this time since COVID, which is astounding. And we know sometimes these inflation pressures get very sticky. So even though our dollars and nominally are looking huge, value in our purchasing power has been drained quite a bit. So money being lost, storing in, say, low interest accounts that is also taxable. On top of it, it can be very damaging to our wealth. And then obviously there's a lot of different philosophies around debt and the use of debt. I am a proponent of using debt for leverage when appropriately used for investments or cash flowing assets, not to really spend so much. But again, there is a rhyme or reason for a lot of these things. But careful use of debt and how we can manage our debt is important. So this is where certainly what I've personally used and learned about infinite banking, family banking to replace the traditional banking system to store money and borrow, doing it through your own environment where you can control and own that, to me has reaped tremendous benefits for myself for sure. And it gives you more control over the use of those dollars. And, at least the money is being stored somewhere. So it's a big area that, you can easily overlook because we get so used to relying on banks to store money for transactions. And then when we need financing, where do you go? Right. And they're the ones that hold the purse strings and they're the ones making all the money through the course of lending other people's money to you. So it's just something to be aware of. And, obviously the banking industry is fairly lucrative and profitable. And it's because they're just using arbitrage, taking dollars they have to pay out, interest in little amounts and then loan it out for more. And they're just making spreads on these things. And why couldn't we do that for our own selves and benefit? So it's just something to consider. And it's something that certainly it's a paradigm shift away from the traditional banking system. But, it's something to consider for those who are looking for more ownership and control of their wealth and can create and manage the financing arm of their lives. Now, the fifth area that I see, and again, it's the way we've been trained, is that most people's or investments are a little bit too concentrated and primarily focused on the markets, right? I'm not saying that's a bad place to put money, but when you kind of look at across how others are doing it, and this is where I studied around how wealthier folks are managing their money and where their assets are located, it's pretty diversified and not when most people think about the stock market, if you're diversified in different types of stocks, that's where people feel they're diversified and we complement it with some bonds. Well, when you look at some of the wealthier folks, they're diversifying way outside the public markets. They're getting into businesses, into real estate, to commodities, and really broadening it out so that risk mitigation is a key aspect of it. And so, as you start growing in wealth, it, it's really important to start thinking about what other investments that you can sort of dive into that you can have a little bit more ownership and control in so that, in my mind, it reduces the risk, right? Because, think about the public markets for a second. Yeah, you can own quote unquote a piece of the business, but you don't really have any control or ownership of the direction of where it goes. So I'm not saying don't invest there. It's just that most people have the vast majority of their investment dollars tied to public markets and are taking more risk than they even recognize when you really look at it on paper. So there are ways to potentially diversify, get into things that you can own more of and control more of, like businesses, real estate, and getting into private equity and other areas that as you grow in your wealth, you have potential access to that and you can invest in to diversify. And so then this way you have more sort of control and hopefully over the course of time you'll earn more and keep more, right? Because the reality is this is that it would take a little more active sort of participation in learning these things. But I've gone through it, I've seen it, and it's not that difficult. It's just whether you want to spend the time to learn those things and get more comfortable with them, or sit passively and play the public markets. I'm not saying there's a right and wrong, but when you look at the folks who are building that sizable level of wealth, if that's a goal of yours, they're not just playing the public markets, they're really diversifying out of it. Now, the next thing I see is, typical, right? We're talking about risk mitigation, which is not the sexy part of building wealth. However, the folks who are wealthier recognize that the importance of risk mitigation to not take away all your wealth is so key, right? Because we know things will shift, markets move, right? Cycles occur, right? And so having the right mitigation tools in place are huge, right? So one of the things that we do know happens, and I see it often, is people discount the risks associated with dying and getting disabled, right? This happens all the time. Obviously, we are mortal. We can get injured, accidents happen. And, what I see in most cases that put people at significant risk is that they're trying to do it all as cheap as possible because that's what we've been trained. Like insurance is meant to be, let's minimize it, take the least amount of cost to do it so we can go invest more but then puts our families and our business and other things at risk because we're trying to be cheap. And what I do know is that, I used to do this with my clothes. I buy some cheap clothes, but they've run out, right? They're cheap for a reason. And so it's important to factor this in as you're thinking about your wealth building as a whole to balance the protection side and the wealth building because the last thing we want to do is have things wiped away or income stream completely gone now because something happens to us. And now we're putting our families and our futures at massive risk. And this is an area that I think most people underestimate or don't really understand. And so it's important that you take a look and examine, are you adequately protected? And it's not just a needs thing. I think about these things as wants. Most of this industry is talking about needs. What do I need to cover? Well, I like to play in wants. Like, would you want to happen if you were no longer on this earth? What would you want for your family? If I couldn't work anymore, what would you want to have happen? And then put those things in place. And that's to me, even though it's centered around protection, it's investment to protect my family's wealth and the future that we all want. Now, the last thing is, which I often, and again, this is, I understand why, because we don't like to think about death and leaving this earth, but that's a reality. And so I do occasionally think about it to help me make sure I'm spending my time wisely and recognizing that day will come and I just don't know exactly when. And that's an estate plan, even something basic, getting a will in place. But, it's actually fairly inexpensive to get a basic set of documents together, like powers of attorney and healthcare proxies, and even a living trust is not very expensive to get something in place so that if that day happens, that one, that the wishes that you had for your family are adhered to, and then two, that the transfer of wealth can happen efficiently with the least amount of cost, right? Especially if you've built up assets and investments and then having to go through probate could be, for some states, very expensive and then delay the wealth transfer to your family. And so those are things that you could do now to address that area at a basic level and then certainly evolve it over time and get super fancy with some of these trusts and try to, if you have estate tax problems, obviously address those needs. But even just getting that basic estate plan in place, to me, this is again investing in yourself and your family to protect them going forward. And then that what you want to happen will happen when you put some of these things in place and plan ahead. So it's something that I encourage people to do all the time. And again, it's one of those things that it's not urgent, so it's easy to put off. But, in these sorts of scenarios, I'd rather be 20, 30 years early than a day late because it can have a sizable impact depending on what's happening in your life and the wealth you've built up. So I hope these things give you some food for thought, and certainly, just like I did with my health, to go seek out other experts and people who are thinking about things more holistically around health. That's also a thing to be thinking about for your wealth, because it isn't just about investments or insurance. It's about coordinating all those things from taxes to legacy planning, all those things. It certainly can get complicated, but having a more holistic approach will ensure that your dollars and your investments and your money is being coordinated in a way to deliver what you truly want. What would you want to have happen? And that's really a game that we all have to do for ourselves individually, for our families, and take ownership of that, right? No one's going to manage your money better than you or care as much about it. So it's important that you learn for as much as you can around these things, so you recognize the things that you're doing are best for you and the things that you value. So I hope you got some value out of this and got you thinking. And certainly, I would encourage you to reach out to your advisor or people or certainly folks at Perennial Pride. We'd love to chat with you and hopefully help you steer you down the right path to identify those areas in your life that are important, you want to address, and get the facts so you can make the best decisions for yourselves and your families. Take care, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help you get more educated around your finances so that you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next